All right. All right, this is a little top heavy. I'm going to set it down here so it doesn't fall. So, talk today is on the experimentation mindset. And I want to start off with just maybe a bit of a definition. So, mindset. This is a thing that we're hearing a lot now, right? You need the Agile mindset is something that you hear quite often. But what exactly is a mindset? When we say that, what does it mean? Well, fundamentally, a mindset is nothing more than the ideas and the attitudes that a person would approach any given situation with. It's just the way that you look at something. And the thing is, our mindset has an unbelievably significant impact on our experience. If we can change our mind, we can change our experience. Now, to help understand mindset, because I was kind of new to this phrase, I started looking at a material on the topic. And some of my favorite material on mindset is from Carol Dweck. How many of you are familiar with the work of Carol Dweck? All right, so a few. And I think more and more of us are going to be hearing about this over the course of a few years. But Dweck and her team did a bunch of research. Among the studies that they did was they took a group of kids, school-age kids, and they ran a fairly simple experiment. They took these kids and they gave them a math test. They gave them a test that was a bit advanced for where they were in school, but not so much of a stretch that they couldn't complete it. So it was a challenge, but it was certainly not an impossibility. They gathered all the test results up, and then they randomly split the students into two groups. Now, when they handed back the tests, to group A, they said one thing, and to group B, they said another. There's actually a small difference in what they said, but that small difference had a huge impact. It ended up in a very, very big result. Group A, when they handed back the test, they said to the students, "You know, you did really well. You must have worked hard on this." Group B, when they handed back the tests, they said, "You know, you did really well. You must be pretty smart." Group A, when asked if they wanted to take another test like this, said, yeah, I think I'm up for that. I think I could do that. Group B, when asked the same question, said, yeah, I don't think so. Maybe not. Group A, as the grading period went on, excelled more and more. They became leaders in the class. Their grades went up. They started tutoring other students. Group B, as the grading period went on, became more and more disconnected and despondent, and their grades got worse and worse. This is what Dweck refers to as a growth and a fixed mindset. See, basically inception in this case. With these students, what they did was they told them indirectly, you did well because of your hard work. That means if I work harder, I can do better. And they told these students, you did well because you're smart, which has a finite capacity. If you push it, you'll find the limits. So I thought this is really interesting, this growth and fixed kind of concept. Now, how does that apply? Like, why does that apply to a learning environment? How is it that we learn that this makes a difference? So I started looking around for how is it that we learn. And I came across a number of different models, but one that's extremely popular, well-known, and kind of substantiated is the Dreyfus Model of skills acquisition. Is anyone familiar with this? All right, so again, a handful. So the Dreyfus Model comes from two brothers, Stuart and Hubert Dreyfus. The model came around in the 1980s, fairly influential report that they had done. They'd done a bunch of research through Berkeley, University of California, working with the military, looking specifically at the medical field, medics, nurses, doctors within the military, and kind of how did they learn, and then extrapolating this to other industries. Now, the model today, if you go look it up, has it's been extended. I think there's 7 stages, et cetera. I'm going to go with the original 5 for the purposes of this discussion. So, Dreyfus Model, fundamentally, everyone starts off, when you're learning something new, you start off as a novice. You don't have a whole lot of knowledge about whatever this thing is, and you need the rules. So how many of you here play some kind of a musical instrument? All right, so several. Now, for myself, I don't play any of them well, but I do play a couple of different musical instruments. And I know that when I started, guitar, for example, my guitar teacher basically said, put your finger here, pluck this string. That's an A. This is a C. Right? Very simple. These are the rules. This is how it works. These are the mechanics. At this stage, you're super impatient for results. Right? You're 10 years old, you've picked up the guitar, you want to be a rock star, so you want to be able to play right away. This is boring and dumb, but it's what you need. And you're focused very much on how am I doing this over why am I doing this. You need a mentor at this point. But you advance, we all do. And eventually, you become an advanced beginner. So now you've got some experience. You've played a bit. You've done the things the teacher said. And you're getting to a point now where you can find information. You can actually start looking for things. You know to go look for books on guitar playing on your own. Now here's the challenge. At this point, even though you can find information, you can't tell what's good information and what's bad information. If I've got developers in the audience, when you're first learning a language, and you Google for something, and you think, I kind of know what this is, and you end up on Stack Overflow, and there's an example of code. Is it good, or is it crap? How do you know? At this point, you can't really know that. So you can't filter out irrelevant information. So you still need experience in a limited context, and you're still kind of focused on, like, how am I supposed to do this? But you're getting a little bit better at it. You move into competence, and now you're starting to develop these mental models. You're starting to actually understand things. Maybe there's a little bit of theory here. Associations start to get formed. Now when you're Googling for stuff, you can kind of make a decision between, like, all right, that's not very good, but this is pretty useful for me. But you're still very methodical at this stage, and you're still kind of steeped in right and wrong. You're looking for the right answer. You're looking for the one true way to do the thing. At this point, you need a bunch of experience in real-world situations. Maybe if it's a musical instrument, now you're kind of playing out, you're in a band, you're doing some stuff, and you're learning as you're actually doing the thing. And you can start to actually hold these mental models. You're starting to develop your own ideas about how this works. Eventually, we go from competence into proficiency. This is an excellent place to be. You now understand the big picture. You can actually grasp and apply maxims, simplistic concepts. So if you're an XP developer, when you first started off, one of your mentors may have told you, Yagni, you ain't gonna need it. Sounds cool. What does that mean? It's not until you have enough experience that you can actually discern, oh, right, you ain't gonna need it means this. At this point, you've internalized the rules. To move to the next stage, what you need to be able to do is practice. And you need to be able to practice hindered as little as possible by policies or guidelines. This is the point at which you need to just do things, noodle around, mess with it. You know all the rules, break them. And use that new learning to figure out what it truly means to be a musician, what it truly means to be a product owner, what it truly means to be a developer. And if you can do that, you move to expert. This isn't a word that I throw around lightly, and I don't use it very often, but it's a part of the Dreyfus Model, so we're going to use it today. As an expert, you are a true authority. You've actually developed this intuition. You've got a deep pool of knowledge. You can actually interlink all of these skills. One thing about experts that's kind of interesting, early experts especially, they tend to be very inarticulate at how they arrive at conclusions. They make really bad teachers. Because what's happened is all those rules that you used to know, you've broken all of them, and you've developed this new understanding. And the way that you do things, you don't have words for it yet, and it's difficult to explain that to a beginner. But if you continue to practice and you continue to learn, your skills will continue to grow, and eventually you start to realize ways that you can share this information very simplistically. So I want to ask all of you a question. I guess, first of all, if you've been in your chosen vocation for 5 years or more, can you just raise your hands? So you've been a BA or a developer or whatever for 5 years or more. Okay. So this is a question specifically for you folks. You don't have to shout the answer out. Just hold it, keep it to yourself. But for those of you that have 5 or more years of experience, specifically in your vocation, where do you think you are on this scale? Where are you on the Dreyfus Model? Now, this question's been asked to a number of people, thousands of folks, and the standard answer is expert. But the reality is, most of them are actually stuck at proficient. Now, they may be highly proficient. There are people who are proficient, can hear a piece of music once and play it back perfectly. That is a very high level of proficiency, but they are not yet expert. The expert can play along with a piece of music they've never before heard. It's another level. Now, why is it that so many of us, especially at work, get stuck at proficient? Well, it turns out, according to the early models from Dreyfus, in the beginning, it's all about implementation. Remember, you're focused on how, not why. You're looking for the perfect answer, the right way to do the thing. It's all about doing the job well. It's all about doing it the best way that it can be done. This is what we call the implementation mindset. It's a focus on getting it right, earning good grades, not making mistakes. It's a focus on implementation. But to go from proficient to expert, what do you need to do? You need to break those rules. You need to noodle around. You need to experiment. With the experimentation mindset, that's exactly what we're doing. We actually need to get it wrong and then make it better. Try things that are novel and unusual and learn from those to actually expand our knowledge beyond the common. So we went from growth and fixed to experimentation and implementation. Now I want to look at these two mindsets, experimentation, implementation, in a somewhat typical company. So when I was much younger, I was in college, and I was looking for a way to make some money. I had delivered pizzas, and my car had blown a rod and was no longer useful, and I had to find some other way of making money. And my buddy, Tommy, had told me that he heard about this place that you could go work, and all you had to do was sit on the phone and make calls. We were selling magazines. So I thought, all right, telephone sales, I can probably do that. Now, I'm not quite this old, but I am this old. So Tommy and I went down and we applied for the job. And we got the job. And I was pretty excited about it. And, you know, first day, of course, there's orientation and all of that stuff. And after we signed the basic paperwork and understood the fundamental rules, I said, okay, here's how it's going to work. You're going to come in. There's going to be a stack of index cards on your desk, because we didn't have computers back then. You're going to pick up an index card, and you're going to dial the number on that card, and you're going to talk to that person, and you're going to sell them the magazine that's listed for the number of years that we have indicated on the card. That's it. Now, here's how you're going to do the calls. All you need to do is follow the script. We're going to give you a script. Here it is. It's a written thing. You just fill in the blanks. The person's name, your name, blah, blah, blah. I thought to myself, dude, this is going to be great. And I knew it would be great because it told me so 3 times in the script. So that's what I did. I came in every day, I picked up my index card, I made my phone calls, I talked to folks, and I followed the script exactly as it was outlined. And this is what happened. This is the weekly sales ranking. I don't know if you can see my name on there. If you're looking at the top of the list, scan down a little bit. Now, on this list, there was an important point, a line that the manager would draw. If you were below this line 3 weeks in a row, you were fired. If during a 7-week period, you fell below this line 4 times, you were fired. And this line wasn't a set sales target. This was a strict rank and yank. You had to be above the 25% mark. It's the end of my first week, and I'm already below it. I don't know what I'm doing, but I've only got a couple more weeks, and I'm gone. I need to figure this out pretty quick. So I'm thinking about it. And I'm looking at this list. At the top of the list, I see this name, Ptolemy. Huh. All right. So who's this Ptolemy cat? And I start looking around. You know how, like, there's the employee of the month signs sometimes, and you'll have, like, people's name, the name next to each month. That thing read, like, Ptolemy, 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 Janet, Ptolemy, 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 George, Ptolemy. Like, this dude was salesperson of the month over and over and over again. He was the only person on the sales floor that had an assigned desk. And the reason that he had an assigned desk was because he had to have some place to put all of his sales trophies. So I thought, okay, if I want to get good at this job, I should watch the master. I should watch Ptolemy. And I know that he's going to say, hello, sir, madam, my name is Ptolemy Milikakis, because that is what the script tells him to say. But he didn't. Instead, he says, good day, my name is Pat Michaels. Ptolemy is a liar. I don't understand. What's this? What's going on? So I go up to Ptolemy and I ask him. I say, hey man, what's the story? I was listening in, and I know that we're supposed to follow the script, but you're not following it. You're not following it entirely. Like, I noticed that you say good day, and I noticed that you say your name is Pat Michaels. And Ptolemy says, yeah. So here's the thing. I can't tell by the name printed on the paper or by the sound of their voice if they're male or female. And so I don't want to say good day, sir, or madam, because I'm going to get it wrong, and that makes people angry. So I just found a way to not say that. and it was the early 80s in Midwestern United States. Like it or not, if you called a stranger and you announced that your name was Ptolemy Milokakis, that phone call lasted for far less time than if you said your name was Patrick Michaels. So he told him that was his name. I thought, okay, I get it. So what you did was like you took the script and you just modified it a little bit. You kind of worked with it till it worked for you. And he said, yes, that's exactly what I did. I said, okay, I can do that. So for the next week or two, that's exactly what I did. I ran a bunch of different experiments. I tried being the joker. I tried being kind of the angry, aggressive guy. I tried being the bumbling fool. And for the most part, I just tried being nice and friendly and listening to people. And sure enough, it worked. In not following the script, I was able to move up. I was no longer near that line. And for the next few weeks, it was me, then Ptolemy, then me, then Ptolemy, kind of back and forth, but I was set. I had figured this out. So at this particular place of employment, every 8 weeks, after your first 8 weeks, you have a review with your manager. So my 8-week review is coming up. I'm feeling pretty good. Doing well in sales, number 1, sometimes number 2, but really, we know I'm number 1, right? Yeah. And I've got a few suggestions maybe. Let's start with this coffee first, right? But then let's talk about some other things around here. This review did not go as I expected. My boss looked at me, leaned across his desk, and he said, "You know what, Mr. Norton? I think there's a few things you don't understand. Maybe you weren't paying attention during the training. Maybe you weren't feeling well. Maybe you skipped the training and somehow passed through under the radar. I don't know. But in that training, we made it pretty clear that we have a script. This script is our best practice. Now, you may not know this, but we record all your phone calls, and we run them through quality control. Yes, as a matter of fact, sometimes we listen in to live calls. And there is sufficient evidence that tells us that you are not following the script. Now, I know you're doing pretty well. That's all well and good. But I need you to go home tonight, and I need you to think about your future at this organization. And I need you to think about how much better you would be doing in sales if you just followed the script." As you can imagine, I decided maybe this wasn't the right place for me. The following Friday, being young and impetuous, I decided, forget it, I'm out. I'm not staying here anymore. Today's the day that I quit. I got in, and I did the day's work, the normal thing. At the end of the day, I've got one card left on my desk. And I pick it up, and I start dialing the number. And I don't know why, but as I'm dialing, I stand up. And as it starts to ring, I step on my chair. I can hear Tommy behind me. He's giggling. And as it clicks, and I hear, "Hello?" I stand onto my desk. I'm standing on top of my desk on a Friday afternoon, making my last phone call ever. Tommy thinks this is hilarious. So he scrambles to the top of his desk. And the next thing I know, person after person is standing on their desk. There's probably half a dozen of us now, standing on our desks on a Friday afternoon, making the last call of the day. And it occurs to me in that moment, I probably should have told Tommy I was quitting. But I finished that phone call. I was supposed to sell 2 years of Field and Stream to some dude in Idaho that I'd never met before. And I sold him 3 years. And I left, and I never looked back. See, best practices, they're a misnomer. The very notion is steeped in a fixed and implementation mindset. They actually create artificial boundaries for our learning. They stop us from experimenting. They stop us from becoming experts. They stop us from being the best at our jobs that we could be. They wanted me to get it right. They wanted me to follow the script, to get better at the script. That script was their best practice, and they truly believed that if you got better at the script, you'd get better at sales. Now, this is what Chris Argyris refers to as single-loop learning. In single-loop learning, what happens is we hold fast to some underlying assumptions, such as the notion of a best practice. When we operate in this context, when we operate in this belief that this is a best thing and we don't get the results that we want, what we do is we try to get better at the thing. We just try and do that better until we get the output that we want, until we get the outcomes that we want. This is single loop learning. We are no longer challenging any of our base assumptions. Now, the problem with this is it's a focus entirely on getting it right. And a focus on getting it right creates an environment where failure is hidden. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's just that we hide it because we want to look good, because we fear failure. And I think you all know fear is the path to the dark side. What we want is double loop learning. What we want, on occasion, challenge those base assumptions. Look at your purpose. Why are you doing a thing? What is the outcome that you hope to achieve? And what else could you do? What could you do differently? So don't just get better at doing code reviews. I've gone into organization after organization. They said, yeah, we're just not doing too good at code reviews. We decided that only the seniors would do code reviews. Then we decided that code reviews had to happen every Tuesday and Thursday. Then we decided that code reviews. Okay, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that we're not doing good at code reviews. Is that what you want, is good code reviews? What do you actually want? Well, what we actually want is higher code quality. We want shared understanding. We want maybe enforced standards. All right? Well, what else could you do? What if you did pull requests? What if you did pair programming? What if you mobbed? Let's get crazy. Right? What else could you do to get the outcomes that you want? It's easy stuff, but that's double loop learning. Think about this. What if we didn't have annual goals, quarterly financials? What if we didn't have managers? What if we didn't have any hierarchy at all? What if we challenged some of those base assumptions? That is the experimentation mindset. It is thinking about things in different ways. It is exploring different ways. It is challenging those base assumptions and trying small things. Now, if there's anything you take away from this talk today, here's one of the key ones I want you to take away. How many of you have heard someone utter the phrase best practice at work? Me too. And usually, it's in defense of a thing that they don't want to talk about anymore. We're going to do this because it's a best practice. Here's what I'm suggesting. Rather than saying best practice, from now on, say leading practices. It's a small change, but it could make a big difference. Best suggests we can't do any better than this. Leading suggests this is the one in first place right now, but something could overtake it. Let's change that mindset. So we've talked about mindsets, and we've talked about education, we've talked a little bit about companies, but let's get a little closer to what it is that we do. And so I would argue that at an Agile conference, almost everyone here is involved in some way or another in product development. Right? We are writing software to serve some need. It is a product, or it supports and serves a product. Here's something I see, metaphorically, when I go into a number of organizations. Organization launching a new product. So they're planning an expedition to a part of the jungle no human has ever before seen. Now, let's assume that this area of the jungle has a very lush canopy, so aerial photography is no good. No one's actually ever been there. Wow, that sounds pretty exciting. How do you know you're actually going to be successful? How do you ensure that it's going to work when you actually get there? Given this problem, most companies, the solution is something along these lines. That's easy. We're going to spend 6 months creating a detailed map based on our experience in other jungles. This tends to be, to a great extent, what the industry still does. We do a bunch of work up front based on tons of assumptions, based on maybe prior experience, but not based on our actual situation, not based on our actual context. And we somehow believe that the more of that we do, the better the end result's going to be. Here's the thing. It looks an awful lot like this. Requirements, analysis, design. Oh, and then let's go do something. You guys know what this is? How familiar is it? Is this familiar for everybody? What is this that we're looking at here? Waterfall, right? How many of you know the history of this diagram? All right, I'm going to do just a quick. So the first diagram, indicating a stage process like this, paper was written in 1956. Herbert Bennington wrote this paper. It was a 5-stage process. 14 years later, Dr. Winston Royce writes a paper, 1970, for IEEE. So it's published in the IEEE journal, and then he gives a presentation on it at their annual conference. Paper was managing the development of large software systems. This is figure 2 in the original document. This is Dr. Winston Royce. You may notice the expression on Royce's face. The paragraph directly beneath this diagram. I believe in this concept, but the implementation described is risky and invites failure. The rest of the document goes on to explain why y'all should never do this. That document is the basis of the waterfall methodology that was adopted by the US government and became extremely popular. If you read the rest of the paper, the last diagram looks like this. Now, there's a lot of documentation in here, but it was 1970. Systems were still not quite where we are today. System requirements. First step is the only phase that is not impacted by nor involves testing. At every other phase, you are testing, and you're looping back. You can even see kind of a figure 8 thing that happens, where you're learning from what you're doing, and you're looping it back into the requirements, and you're continuing to build and code. What's that look like? Now, here's the thing that's really great. The Bennington paper from 1956 was paper 2 of a 3-part series. The first paper said, you should experiment and prototype, and then when you've learned, follow paper 2. So even the waterfall thing that was done in 1956 wasn't actually waterfall. All right, but I'm preaching to the choir, right? Because we're all Agile. I know we're Agile because we're here at this conference, so you guys already know that waterfalls, right? And Agile is not about implementation at all, is it? Totally not about implementation. I mean, you might want to do less with more, I guess. Or you might want to be safe or maybe a little disciplined. And, there's a couple of certifications that you could get. Okay, there's a few certifications that you could get. Okay, there's an embarrassingly needless number of certifications that you could get. Right? Agile, yeah, no problem here, right? I don't know what's happened. I don't know what we're doing as an industry. Agile as I once knew it is practically gone. Right? It's replaced by frameworks, certifications, prescriptive process, and buzzwords aplenty. We used to write software in small increments, focus on technical excellence, focus on customer satisfaction. We tried things, we learned, we adjusted. I had a conversation with another Agile coach not too long ago over a couple of drinks and some dinner, and we were talking about portfolio planning and management. And I was saying, I'm really looking for a simple, lightweight technique to visualize dependencies between teams. He said, yeah, totally. He said, actually, I get where you're coming from. What you need is at least one planning iteration to help define the large solution level. You're going to uncover the enablers within the value stream to drive your KPIs. Then your lean portfolio management milestones will help define the solution context, which drives program incentives into the release train. And I went, what? What did you just say to me? He said, well, if you're not uncovering enablers of synergistic value streams to load into the release train, you're just not doing corporate Agile right. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore when we say Agile. But there is some light in the dark. There are some folks who are still doing kind of the core fundamental things, right? Not making up these installations of Agile, but actually learning and practicing and trying. How many of you know who Woody Zuhl is? All right, I got a handful. Woody's been involved in a couple of things. He's been involved in many things, but two that really come to mind. One, how many of you have heard of no estimates? All right, crazy concept, right? That we could actually write software without estimating. So Woody is one of the driving forces behind that general movement. This movement itself has kind of bifurcated, and there's different views on it. I actually like Woody's view in general. I don't always like the way that he articulates the problem, but Woody's approach to no estimates I found very interesting. So when he worked at Hunter Laboratories, what they ended up doing was they said, you know what, we're spending a lot of time guessing at how big a thing is or how complex it is, and then trying to extrapolate that out, and then trying to do these predictions, and trying to do all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. What if, just bear with me here for a second, what if we took a different approach? What if the developers worked on one thing, and one thing only? They worked on the most important thing. What's the most important thing they could be working on for the business right now? And they will work on that until one of two conditions is met. One, it's completed. Two, it's no longer the most important thing. That's it. And that's how they ran projects at Hunter, and they were successful with it. So literally, no estimating. The other thing that Woody's been involved in, I think he's much more of a champion of this than even the no estimates, is mob programming. Now, aside from my mentioning it earlier in the talk, how many of you have heard of mob programming? All right, this is another crazy idea. I go into companies and I talk about pair programming, and people lose their minds, right? Managers can't fathom, like, wait, whoa. What do you mean two people at one computer? That's going to be twice as slow. I want my people to go faster. Why would you do that? So mob programming sounds insane. 3, 4, 5 people all at the same computer. One keyboard, one mouse, 5 people working. For those of you, that, I don't know if anyone in here has tried it or not, I have used it several times to get teams skilled up very quickly on a new language or framework. We have used it for onboarding folks, and we have teams at places that I'm currently coaching where mobbing is the only way that they write software, and they are finding that it is actually more efficient and more effective than when they were doing individual development. So it's a very interesting thing to take a look at. Another one, Joshua Kirievsky. How many of you are familiar with Joshua? So Joshua's been around for a while. Long time ago, he was involved in the patterns community, and then he was involved in the Agile community as well. He wrote the book Refactoring to Patterns. Some of the developers out there might be familiar with it. And he founded Industrial Logic after leaving ThoughtWorks. And the thing that Joshua's been working on lately is modern Agile. Now, some people consider this a return to the basics. Others see it as an update to match Agile to today's context, and others see it as just a complete departure from Agile, and it's not even Agile. It doesn't matter to me what your particular perspective on it. I personally find value in this. But what's important here is Josh and his team, they're rethinking what it means to be Agilists, and they're trying new things, and they're trying new experiments, and they are sharing with the world what it is that they're doing and what it is that they're learning. So there are definitely some bright spots, I think, in the Agile community. Now, I had mentioned before, according to the Dreyfus Model, if you remember this, we have to go from implementation to experimentation, which means that kind of like the early days, you've got to have all these rules and all these guidelines. And the reason in companies that we can't really move past proficiency into expertise is because they put all these rules and guidelines in place to protect us from our younger, earlier selves, from our, advanced beginner novice selves. But the rules never go away, even as we advance. Well, Dreyfus was 1980. The study was done based on observationally, how is it that people learn? Those studies have been extended, they've been expanded. We've taken new looks at things, and you know what we figured out? You can experiment the whole way. You don't need all of the rote prescriptive stuff. You can actually experiment the entire time, and in many cases, we learn faster in that way. We get better results. We have tacit knowledge. We actually internalize it sooner when we learn in this way. And now we're seeing things where, like, the Finland school systems have switched the way that they teach to this, and they're their scores are going through the roof. Things are doing much better. In the United States, we're seeing this in some school systems. They're flipping the entire curriculum around and changing the way that things are working. So I think there's going to be more on this. But the reality of it is that experimentation works all the way through. There is no point at which implementation is actually needed or necessary for us to learn, for us to advance, for us to get better at what it is that we're doing. So experimentation, let's do one more. Let's talk about experimentation at work. Because so far we've talked about a bunch of different things, but how might this apply to you, right? So it's another story from kind of my own experience in my life. I took a job. My career's kind of ebbed and flowed. Consultant, full-time employee somewhere, CTO, director, blah, 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 consultant. This is one of those periods where, I had really low self-esteem and decided to take a full-time job instead of, be a consultant. No, actually, I got a really exciting job with a really exciting company. But first day, it was a little interesting, right? So first day on the job, you know how this goes. You go through the whole HR thing, and you got to sign paperwork, et cetera. So yeah, yay, paperwork. Okay, good for me. There's supposed to be a graphic here. It's gone. So filled out a bunch of papers, and then they gave us the employee guidelines, employee manuals, just light reading. But it's fairly extensive. I have no idea why this. It's fairly extensive. So they had a meeting for us, and they just covered some of the key points real quick. And then after that, HR guy took me upstairs, and he says, "All right, Doc, there's your team." And I'm not kidding you. This guy just disappeared. It was just gone. So, okay, this is my team. Cool. I go, "Hey, team. I'm Doc." They had no idea who I was. They didn't know why I was there. What's worse is, I was their new director. I was their boss's boss. I'm going to advance the next slide because my graphic's missing. The manager comes running over and says, oh, hey, sorry. Yeah, I was supposed to tell the team you were coming before you got here, but I've been super busy and I just totally forgot. Team, this is Doc. Doc's my boss, and he's going to help us out, and I quit. So they gave me my new laptop. How many of you have started someplace and they give you a new laptop and it's still got the residue from somebody else's stickers on it? Yeah. So that was pretty cool. I got my new laptop, and then they said, okay, so part of the onboarding for everyone, don't care that you're a director, good for you. We want you to understand the system. So what we need you to do is get your development environment set up. You're just going to need to do, a couple of installs. Now, it might get a little complicated. So what we want you to do, if you've got any questions, first, go check the wiki. What I started doing was I went to the wiki, and for every link that I had to follow, I control-clicked into it, which opens a new tab. And this is what my browser looked like in very short order. So the installs were incredibly difficult to get to do. But it only took me 4 days to get my workstation set up. I beat the record. Now, to be fair, I beat the record for directors and above. I did not beat the developer or, director. But this is my experience. They didn't know I was coming. They gave me a crappy machine. I had to install it myself. I really got no help doing it. Did I really feel welcome? No, not at all. And it's my responsibility, one, to hire the replacement manager, but two, to actually grow this team and to figure out what it is that we're doing. So I start talking with other people in the organization, and it turns out that this is a systemic problem across all of engineering. It isn't just in my particular area. This experience is awful for everyone. So what can we do? Well, as a director, I'm lucky enough that I've got the power and the authority that I can start mandating how this is supposed to work. But it's not really my style. So instead, I sit down with the different teams. I talk to them about what's going on for you. What was it like for you guys? What experiences have you had? How would you want to solve that problem? How would you want to address this? What would you do differently? And what we did was we started running a bunch of small experiments. Teams identified pain points in onboarding that they felt were critical or important, and they started looking at ways that they could solve those. So now we've got all of these teams running these different kind of micro experiments around different aspects of onboarding. And we bring them together, and they talk about what it is that they're experiencing, and what it is that they're learning, and how it's working for them. And sure enough, things start to happen where, you guys came up with a great solution to that problem. They hadn't even thought about that, but now that they've heard what you did, they started adopting it. And you guys folded what they did into what you're doing. And by the way, the thing that you guys started doing, everybody wants to do that now. And over a period of time, 3 or 4 months, remember, we were growing pretty quick. By the way, this was Groupon, in case I hadn't mentioned that. We were going pretty quick. So over the course of 3 or 4 months, we had learned a lot. We had run a bunch of different experiments, and we began to coalesce on things that actually just made sense for us. And the onboarding process just kept getting better and better and better through these small experiments. And we did find things. We did find things like the data science team had a different onboarding process than the folks that were building the search engine, because there were different skills, different needs for that particular team. So we didn't really have a one-size-fits-all. We had a lot of stuff that was common, and then we had stuff that kind of differentiated, but it made sense where it differentiated. And eventually, although this is not Groupon material, this is somebody else who put their stuff out there for public consumption, we had an experience that was much more like this, where you showed up on first day, you had a brand new laptop that was actually properly configured with the right image that actually worked. You had notebooks, you had your track jacket, which is a thing that they were known for, et cetera, et cetera. It was a much better experience. People actually felt welcome. But we started it with just small experiments on each team and kind of figuring out where we were going to go. And each team challenged different assumptions about how things should happen, right? Maybe we always kind of believe that the manager should take this responsibility. Well, maybe the manager shouldn't take that responsibility. Maybe the team should do that. Maybe we always believe that HR should do this. Maybe that's not the case. So there's 4 things that I'd like you to take away from this talk. I've mentioned them all, but I want to repeat them here. The first, challenge assumptions. There are things that you're doing at work right now because they're a best practice or because it's the way we've always done it. Why? What are we actually doing? What is the outcome that we're trying to get? Why are we doing this thing? I have Tesla Motors up here for a reason. It's been a few years now, so it's not nearly as newsworthy, I guess. But a few years back, Tesla released all of their patents, except for their battery patents, into the public domain. Now, why would a company do this? Tesla was leading the automotive industry in innovations, was generating more patents than any of the competitors, held more new innovations around frames car structure, etc. Well, what they did was they sat back and they said, you know what? Why do we exist? What are we here for? Tesla was founded to lower the carbon footprint. That is our mission. That is our goal. That is why we exist. There is no possible way that we will scale production or sales to the point that we will be the only manufacturer on Earth. So if we truly want to lower the carbon footprint, we need to share these things that we know with all other manufacturers so that they can adopt them, they can use them, and collectively, we can make the world a better place. And that's what they did. They challenged some base assumptions about the way they've been running the company, they recognized their values, and they changed the way that they were operating. The next thing is I want you to make failure acceptable. It's hard to grasp sometimes, but I promise you, when failure is acceptable, success is more likely. The next thing I want you to do, I want you to think big, but start small. Yeah, we wanted to revamp all of onboarding, but we started with teams. We started locally. We ran small experiments. We learned in safe ways. We shared information. We coalesced and we scaled that up. And the last thing I want you to do, the last thing I want you to remember when you go back, I want you to work on discovering your leading practices. Start with something that you've done in the past. Start with something you've heard at other places, Spotify model, whatever. And then adjust as necessary to discover your own leading practices. As you return to work tomorrow, what assumptions could you challenge? How can you make failure acceptable? Right? Maybe it's not at a company level, maybe it's not even at a department level, but maybe it's with your team, or maybe it's just with the person sitting next to you. How can you create that safety for others that allows them to start doing small experiments? And what small experiments could you run to get you closer to some big goal? Think about the conference experience that you had today. You all went to a number of sessions. You heard about new ideas. You heard about new leading practices. How could you run experiments to evolve from that starting point into your leading practices? Thank you. So I think we've got time for some Q&A, do we? Yay, nay? Okay. There are microphones. Microphone 1 over here, microphone 2 over there. Feel free to come up. Any questions? I don't know, can we get a mic to you, or do you want to go back to mic 2? Yeah. I see somebody at mic 2. What's up?
Hello? Okay,
hey.
That works. Just have a question on, Just had a question on what you said about no estimate.
Yeah.
Mostly that we had a few presentations before about dependencies and dependencies between teams. And I feel like most of the solutions that have been proposed are, how to use a tool to kind of help you like manage communication and all that. But what you said is mostly if all the teams are always working on the same thing, they're mostly not really interdependent because they will always work together or not work on that issue at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, so one of the things to realize is that Hunter Laboratories was maybe a 10-person team. So manufacturing, and they had a relatively small IT department, and the challenge they had was, with that small of a team, how do they actually meet the needs of the organization? When Woody first got there, it basically was each developer was working for some specialized area of the company, and usually on 2 or 3 projects each. And so that specific approach worked at that size. As we scale up, we do need some additional thought around what is it that each of the teams is actually working on, focused on, and how do we kind of share that work across them. You can still do this without estimating or with very lightweight estimating. There are techniques that you can use for forecasting where you look at your throughput, and then Troy McGinnis has a bunch of material on how you can actually do forecasting with some really basic data, and you can use that then to start determining how do you manage dependencies between teams.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi.
Hey.
When you talk about make failure acceptance, I think it's important to create a safe environment for team to permit that. So based on your own experience, can you share some cue on that or recommendation to create such environment?
Right, so what are some things that we can actually do that maybe help to make failure more acceptable and create some safety in the environment? So in the talk, I say make failure acceptable. Most of the time when I go into clients, what I actually talk about is not failure, but learning. So I actually reframe failure to learning because, one, it's a bit weird the way that we use the word failure. If you think about an experiment, let's say I'm running an experiment, my hypothesis is that if we do this thing, the team will get more productive. We do the thing, and it turns out the team doesn't get more productive. But we ran the experiment well. Is that a failed experiment? Well, the reality is, no, it's not a failed experiment. It was a successful experiment. It just didn't prove our hypothesis. But most companies see that as failure. And so what I've done is I reframe it as learning. So that's actually a first step towards creating the safety, is removing failure from the language. I say failure in this talk because it hits home better and leads us to some better conversations. I think next piece is starting, depending on your circle of influence within the organization, start locally, right? If you are a director, some level like that, awesome. Start talking with other directors and managers about what safety looks like. But if you're a hands-on keys individual who is, kind of driving stories across the board, then it's starting with your teammates. Even if it's, we learned a bit about empathy this morning from the keynote. Fantastic place to start. How can you foster empathy, build that connection, create that sense of trust, which really fosters that sense of safety? Does that help?
Thank you.
I know I'm between everyone and food and possibly drinks. I will be around throughout the after event, and I'm glad to chat more. So again, thank you very much.